Welcome back to the program, everybody. It is John Pollock with you. We are less than 2 weeks away from one of the biggest fights of all time, and when everything is said and done, maybe the biggest fight of all time, involving Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Conor McGregor. A real honor to be joined by this man, who was a key contributor to putting this fight together. He is the Executive VP and GM of Showtime Sports. Stephen Espinoza on the line. Stephen, how are you doing today?
I'm great. How about yourself?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm sure getting more sleep than you are at the moment. Tell me a little bit about what this final stretch is like for you, less than 2 weeks going into such a fight of such magnitude as we have on August 26th.
Well, in a certain sense, the amount of work actually is decreased at this point, because at this point all the balls are in motion. Mm-hmm. So everything is moving. The distributors are marketing. Hopefully everyone's hearing about the fight. So it's a little bit of keeping the machinery going. But then the last 2 weeks, maybe a little bit less work, but a little bit more, I would say, more stress and more nervousness. Slowly as we get closer to the fight, there are buy reports that are pouring in. There are different measures that we track. So, things get a little bit more interesting when we start seeing actual buys coming in.
When it comes to buys, will that be something that it's going to be the 24-hour period going into the fight that you're going to get a true barometer, or a week out? Do you have enough kind of trackers that maybe are encouraging that you can give an educated guess to?
Well, we certainly have numbers that we track, but if we're hoping for millions of buys, it's sort of tough to really accurately project based on a couple thousand buys. So, and that's generally the ratio. This type of consumer behavior is still very much focused on tuning in, the afternoon or evening of the fight and pushing a button and buying it then, which is a lot of stress and nervousness for TV execs, because it really it is a last minute activity for the most part. We've seen in the past on Mayweather Pacquiao, there were some isolated systems that had some problems with the overload, which is why we are encouraging people to buy in advance. We don't know exactly what the numbers would be, but we do expect a lot of activity on Saturday afternoon and evening. So in terms of planning ahead and making sure you're not caught in some sort of technical glitch, probably the sooner the better in terms of consumers getting their buy-in.
Mayweather and Pacquiao, that was uncharted territory for pay-per-view, for live gates. Having a fight of that level underneath your belt at this point, was that almost a blueprint that when this fight came together, you kind of have the structure in place for something that is well above what your typical pay-per-view offering is going to be? How did that prepare you for this fight?
Well, it did provide a blueprint, or at least it gave us some experience with the type of volume, the type of issues that accompany that. I don't think any of us involved in that fight thought it was a blueprint at the time, because we all walked away after that fight saying this would be a level of performance that we'd probably never see again in our lifetimes. It was, sort of a historic level of performance that you had, several years of pent-up demand, and we really couldn't conceive of something that would generate the same kind of consumer interest in the foreseeable future. Yet here we are 2 years later, and this event has caught fire. It's bringing together two different fan bases, and also bringing another audience to this. It's an audience of people that probably never paid attention to either boxing or MMA, but because of the nature of these two personalities and the sort of once in a lifetime unprecedented nature of the fight, they're intrigued. So, we are hoping for certainly the type of returns that we saw in Mayweather Pacquiao.
When did this fight become real to you? Because it was being discussed as this almost mythical matchup that just had no basis in reality. And I did not think this fight was going to happen. When did it first come to your attention, this fight, and when did it start to be something that, hey, we can make this fight, which seemed impossible if we're talking 12 months ago?
I don't think anyone, any rational person, really thought it was a possibility when it was first being rumored, or at least talked about. Floyd threw it out there, and Conor responded in a number of different venues. And I think at that point, everyone sort of said, "Oh, it's trash talking and bravado," and no one ever took it seriously as a business opportunity. But then the kind of traffic and the fan interest and the media interest was so overwhelming, and Conor and Floyd, kept the pressure on, that after a while it became clear that this was a real business opportunity. But there still was the number one obstacle, the biggest obstacle, and that was UFC was philosophically opposed to allowing Conor to participate in the fight. And so we were stuck in this, sort of strange point of limbo in which the fans wanted to fight, Conor wanted to fight, Floyd wanted to fight, and it was essentially a non-possibility because UFC, didn't want to allow Conor to participate. So really, when this fight became a reality, was really in late May, early June. And that's when UFC announced that they had reached an agreement with Conor for him to participate in the fight, and it cleared the way for this to happen. And the amazing thing is, from that point to when the fight was announced was really only 2 weeks. So it was one of those things where, there was one major obstacle. As soon as that was removed, the floodgates opened. The fighters in particular reached agreement very, very quickly, and here we are 2 weeks away from the fight.
And what do you sense was ultimately what shifted that philosophical stance that the UFC had?
Very interesting point, because there's not a lot in it for them. Conor is already a megastar. I'm not sure. Sure, this probably brings Conor to maybe some of the boxing fans who hadn't partaken of any of Conor's prior fights. But he's a well-known star, a superstar in the sport already. So really, there's not a whole lot of upside in letting him participate. But I think it really was, and this is just my own speculation. I certainly don't know what those internal conversations were like. But I think it was Conor's determination to do this fight. I mean, it wasn't something that was a passing interest. He was focused on one fight and one fight only until I think UFC eventually had to relent.
If you were to contrast Dana White and these negotiations versus the Dana White of 2011, 2012, is it a consistent character? Has he changed in any way from your interactions today versus 5-6 years ago?
No. The business has changed. I think you could say that the UFC has become an even bigger juggernaut and has significantly expanded, particularly internationally. But as an individual, as an executive, the experience is pretty similar. They've had a lot of success at UFC. Dana's been there virtually from the very start, and he has very strong opinions. And it is unavoidable in situations like this where you have parties coming together and collaborating for the first time, really, on an event like this, at least. That occasionally you're going to butt heads, but overall, certainly in comparison to Mayweather-Pacquiao, which was a very difficult negotiation and difficult process to the fight, this has been, with the exception of a few small hiccups here and there, it has been a very smooth process, and I think a very interesting one as UFC becomes a little bit more familiar with some of the boxing business model and vice versa.
I'm curious as well if you can shed some light on a story that, it did get some focus, but I don't think a whole lot of it, and that was involving mixed martial arts reporter Ariel Helwani. Was that somebody that Showtime and Dana White did butt heads on because his name was announced for the coverage and then removed before the Los Angeles press conference? What exactly?
Yeah, that was an unfortunate mix-up. on events like this, it takes a collaboration, and some of the things are sort of loose collaborations, and there are certain elements which are mutual approval. And there have been conversations at the outset in terms of what the talent was going to be, and Ariel was announced before he was fully vetted and fully approved, and that was our mistake. It should not have been announced before the UFC side had an opportunity to weigh in, and that that essentially resulted in that sort of unfortunate withdrawal of his participation.
What was this something that was something that I don't think anyone can dispute the credentials of Ariel Helwani. I think he enhances the coverage, and
correct.
I would think someone in your position would want an Ariel Helwani on your coverage.
No, absolutely. I've had a lot of respect for him over the years. He is obviously a very well-established writer on combat sports. And to be quite honest, we didn't inquire a lot about the nature of sort of the reticence on the UFC side for him to be involved. I'm sure there are probably potentially on-air talent that UFC could propose to use that we wouldn't be thrilled with, and we would ask. We would say, look, no, thank you. And that's essentially what they've done. It was a contractual right, and they exercised it. And unfortunately, for a lot of Ariel's fans, of which I am one, he was not able to be involved.
Sticking with the coverage, another really fascinating figure in the midst of all of this now is Paulie Malignaggi, and I want to go back to his decision to go spar with Conor McGregor and his camp. Was that something he had to clear with Showtime first? Because he's in a very unique position as an analyst on Fight Night.
Yes. As a relationship matter, he certainly came to us. He discussed it with us. And I said, some disclosures I asked him to make. I said, look, obviously you're an announcer, and you think like an announcer, and you might be making observations. So if they're okay with you, with the flow of information on Fight Night, and possibly you mentioning what you saw in camp on Fight Night, on the air, then that's fine. So he did come to us. He thought it was something interesting, potentially fun to do, give him a different insight into the fight. But I don't think anyone really expected it to become the issue that it did.
Do you feel he is too involved at this point? Because I'm of two minds if I'm Stephen Espinoza. On the one hand, you don't necessarily want your analyst to be part of the story. On the other hand, this guy's analysis and his voice is going to be so insightful and so intriguing on Fight Night that I can see kind of a mixed opinion on how deep and how big of a story his involvement has become.
There's Paulie has a sort of an interesting and almost unique ability to compartmentalize. And I'll give another example you may be familiar with. I'd say Adrian Broner.
Right.
And Paulie had a very heated rivalry with Adrian Broner, in his fight against him. Very personal in many ways. And yet, when he called Broner fights, in the future, to him, boxing is boxing. And, candidly, he doesn't see opinion as part of a boxing commentator's role. The tactics are the tactics. The strategies are the strategies. They're either working or not working. So, from his perspective, his personal opinion is, not a factor in his commentating, but, doesn't really have a role in it. He sees his role as analysis and strategy and getting inside a fighter's head. And, he believes, and we believe, that he can still do that objectively.
Just a few more questions here. This has
Sure.
been fantastic. As you look down the road, is Conor McGregor somebody that you can imagine being in business with again, should something, that right fight present itself, because there is no question that this has galvanized the boxing community, the mixed martial arts community, but much more importantly, the average sports fan, the person that maybe has never bought a pay-per-view before, that it seems that Conor McGregor would be very open to doing a future boxing fight and having this established relationship with Showtime.
We certainly would. I mean, it's been a smooth process with UFC. We've both learned a lot about each other's business practices. I foresee a really entertaining and interesting event. And if UFC came back to us with Conor or with someone else, and we thought there was the interest, we wouldn't hesitate to jump back into business in another event like this.
And this sounds a little comical to ask this question, but I think that there's a basis in reality here, and that is the fact it's been floated out there that President Donald Trump has been invited to this fight, and whether or not he shows up, should he take up this invitation, how much of a logistical alteration does this event become, and is a lot of that on your doorstep or Mayweather Promotions? Because if someone the level of the President of the United States is attending a live event, I imagine this goes to a completely different scale in terms of security and other measures that have to be accounted for.
It certainly does. You know, the irony is that Donald Trump did attend Mayweather-Pacquiao.
Yes.
In May of 2015, but obviously the circumstances are radically changed now. Having a sitting president, attend a sporting event is chaotic for event organizers. Often you see them, in luxury boxes because it's a luxury suite is sort of a contained environment. It is able to secure much easier. If you had a sitting president, Trump or someone else, going to a combat sports event, the arrangements would be incredibly difficult, just by the nature of the seating, access, lines of sight, ingress and egress and escape routes. It would throw things in a bit of chaos if that were to be the case, and it would likely fall upon both Mayweather Promotions and Showtime in terms of credentialing and security and how our production arrangements and where we could shoot might change. So if he's there, then great. We welcome him like any other fan. It will be some late nights, I think, if he's going to be attending, in the audience.
So maybe he can order it on pay-per-view and just tweet about the fight.
Yeah, that I will take that. That's just as good.
Final thing here, coming from more the mixed martial arts side of things, looking back at the history with your involvement with the Strikeforce promotion, you add on Mayweather-Pacquiao and now Mayweather and McGregor. My question is, who has the publishing rights to the Stephen Espinoza story, the book, when it comes out? Because I think you have a couple volumes in here of what have been some incredible fights that you could take us behind the scenes of, and sagas from your term here with Showtime. It's incredible.
It's been a short term, but it has been very eventful. I mean, the Strikeforce days were a lot of fun and some really good fights. I mean, I think even some better talent than I think everyone ever realized at the time. Because when you look back and you say, Ronda Rousey and Luke Rockhold and Gilbert Melendez and Daniel Cormier and Miesha Tate and on, those are a good chunk of the most accomplished MMA fighters, currently and in the recent past of UFC. So I'm very proud, as I know Scott Coker is as well, of what was accomplished through Strikeforce and the talent that they identified. And then to go from that and right into the Mayweather business, setting, 2 pay-per-view records out of 6 total fights. it has been a roller coaster, but it's a fun one for sure.
Well, I mean, everyone is counting down to this fight. It's Saturday, August 26th. Of course, All Access still airing Friday nights at 10 Eastern going into the fight. I want to thank you very much, Stephen. This is obviously a fight that you really don't have to be going out of your way to promote, so I very much appreciate you setting aside some time out of your very busy schedule.
Well, I'm happy to do it, and I certainly don't hold it against the Canadian fans. What happened in Toronto? It'll go certainly in my book, being booed by 17,000 people.
Yes,
it's something you don't forget.
It's a sign of endearment from us Canadians. I mean, it's the cold weather. It's just our demeanor. It's a sign of acceptance, Stephen. So don't take it personally.
No, not at all. All right. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Stephen.